Wonderful. Okay, I think we'll take it from here. So thank you everybody for joining today, to our attendees and to our speakers. This is the first webinar in the year for ECF and the role of active travel, the future of transport planning and engagement. So I'll just do a little bit of an intro into ECF and who we are, and then introduce the speakers and then hand over to them because they are the experts. So ECF was founded in 2018 by Kathy Jones and Oliver Deed, who have worked on some of the most high-profile communications and engagement campaigns across the UK and Australia. ECF are the community engagement and communications specialists, focusing on the built environment, and we've worked on a series of master planning, regeneration, active travel to active transport projects. This year marks a really exciting year for ECF as we celebrate 5 years, and we have just opened our Sydney office. So very, very exciting year for us. So a little bit of housekeeping. Thank you everyone for joining us today. If you have a question, please submit into the Q&A. We'll be doing introductions, then hand over to the speakers, and we will then have an open Q&A towards the end of the session. So today, over the last 3 years, the UK has witnessed significant progress towards improving active travel in the UK. So in 2020, the government announced a new plan for walking and cycling. The DfT has launched Healthy Streets and Mini-Holland initiatives. And then Active Travel England was established as its own statutory body just this year, with an announcement of 200 million being released for local authorities to improve active travel in their areas. But what does that actually mean for the industry? So today we are joined by the public and private sector experts who will offer their insights and experiences on the future of active travel. And because we've opened our Australian office, what lessons we can learn and they can take for our colleagues across the pond. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Karen. Karen is the Interim Chief Officer at Liverpool City Council. She's accountable for transforming the Highways and Transportation Department following a government intervention, and she is providing leadership and technical direction. Karen has over 30 years of experience in the industry, and a notable career highlight for Karen was the successful implementation of the Olympic route network for the 2012 London Olympics. Pretty cool. Alex is the Director of Traffic and Transportation at NRP. He has nearly 20 years of experience delivering active travel schemes, primarily in London, with a focus on feasibility design, traffic impact assessments, and modelling. These also include major transformational schemes in central London, such as the West End project on Tottenham Court Road, to Mini-Holland and livable neighbourhood schemes in North London. And then we are also joined by Andrew. So Andrew is a project manager at Gloucestershire County Council in the major projects team. And Gloucestershire have been working alongside NRP and ECF in seeking ways to encourage active travel and walking and cycling in Cheltenham, following the announcement of the Mayor of London at Healthy Streets approach. Now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Karen and she'll give us her perspective.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you for inviting me here today. I'm really excited to talk about a favourite topic of mine, active travel. So can we have the next slide, please? Excellent. So today I'm just going to talk a bit about some complementary strategies, Liverpool's vision, our thought leadership approach, engagement, as well as some of our current schemes, funding opportunities, and some short-term influences. Next slide. Excellent. So we have to recognise the needs of the national, regional and local alignments of visions and strategies. And that's what we've been focusing on in Liverpool. So there's the gear change, the cycle infrastructure design at the national level, not to mention Active Travel England, the new statutory body. And then moving to the regional, and then how we work with our regional colleagues across the combined authorities and their aspirations and aligning our aspirations. And then moving on to Liverpool's local strategies and some of the things that we've done within Liverpool, and particularly around our thought leadership program and some elements on those papers that complement each other. So let's just go on to the next slide. So Liverpool wants to create a city for people, not vehicles. And I think that's the aspiration of a lot of cities and boroughs across the country. So we need to recognise that this will, we need to offer healthier travel choices. We want to reduce car usage. We want to create inclusive facilities. We want to make sure that active travel is affordable and accessible. But more importantly, we also would like to reduce the air pollution as well. So next slide. So some of the things that we've been working on in Liverpool in particular is around our thought leadership program. And there are a number of complementary papers that we've developed that complement the active travel, some being our net zero aspirations, alongside our bus priority aspirations, as well as a particular area of mine that I think we really need to focus on is about career development and how our future designers, engineers, how they perceive active travel and design and moving away from the traditional ways of designing large infrastructure schemes. So we move on to the next slide. So engagement and consultation is really key in ensuring that we get it right. So identifying and involving all stakeholders, ensuring that they have a voice is really key for us. Including those really, really hard to reach communities, because they do matter. And engagement is where we've been focusing most of our efforts, particularly from an equality, diversity and inclusion point of view. And we've included and new processes working alongside with our contractors to ensure that we do engage with those communities that need to be engaged with, that often are quite silent in this area. So we'll move over to some of the schemes that we've implemented. So the next slide. So one of the things that we've really focused on is what we call our pop-up to permanence. So these were the pop-up lanes that we implemented as part of COVID. And at the height of COVID, we had lots of opposition to the pop-up lanes that we implemented. But having said that, now over the last 2 years, we've really seen a step change in the approach to the pop-up lanes, and recently undertook a consultation and have actually got a majority approval in terms of 3 pop-up to permanent lanes, and we're now working to implement those. And those 3 routes are the routes from Vauxhall Road, West Derby Road and Sefton Park. So we're pleased to announce that we've got funding with those and we're starting to implement those. So one of the things that we identified, that by undertaking real on the ground engagement, understanding the real issues and coming up with measures to eliminate some of those issues has really meant that we've had a step change, not only from residents but also councillors who were opposed to some of these. So engagement's really key to making active travel work. So we move on to the next slide. So we've got a different approach. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we're trying to move away from some of the traditional ways of implementing active travel schemes, because we find that they're very clunky, they're not flexible, and they're not designed for the now and where we need to be for the future. So what we've done in Liverpool is identify some of the low-hanging fruit. So let's grab the low-hanging fruit and let's move forward in terms of where we need to be in terms of our medium and long-term strategies. So identifying those low-hanging fruits, which are normally low risk but you get high return, is what we've done in some of the, and I think the pop-up to permanence is one of those that we've done that. And then moving away from the traditional approach to design, procurement, management and construction is where we need to be, and that element of rethinking about how our local planners and our engineers design schemes, consult on schemes, and the construction part of things, how our supply chains implement schemes as well, is a main focus that we've been focusing on in Liverpool. So we move to the next slide. So thank you. So what we're looking at is that there's three kind of main areas I wanted to pick out, and that one of the key areas is about our maintenance. We spend millions a year on our maintenance. So what we've done is that we've started including active travel in our maintenance schemes, so that when a contractor's doing some resurfacing on a particular stretch of road, we'll make sure that we introduce drop curbs. If we can put cycle lanes in, we'll put cycle lanes in. If we can enhance the lighting, we can enhance the lighting. If we can do a little bit of paving footworks, we'll do that as well. And collectively, that will just mean that we tackle an area once and we don't have to come back together. So it's pooling all our fundings together from a maintenance point of view with active travel funding that will enable us to enhance the city and ensure that walking, cycling is a lot easier and safer for our residents. In terms of when we do upgrades, we make sure that we now have starting to introduce pedestrian facilities at all junctions. That's not apparent in Liverpool and London. All signal junctions have pedestrian facilities, but that's not the case in Liverpool. So we are making sure that that's the case. And not only that, making sure that the timings for pedestrians are increased and that we give people the opportunity to cross safely and have the right time signal timings, which has not always been the case. On top of when we're in a particular location, is making sure that street clutter, so we remove street clutter when our contractors are in an area, and we're doing upgrades as well. And also another element is putting some green in the area in terms of our landscaping. And then just one point in terms of innovation. So I think Liverpool's a city that has the e-scooter trials that have been increasingly popular recently, and that's given that's had a step change in Liverpool in terms of the active travel agenda. If I know there's lots of opinions on active travel and scooters, but I do feel that there is a place for them as part of active travel. And then not to mention introducing EV charging infrastructure in the city as well. So lastly, on to the last slide. So oops, I think one of my slides missing. Never mind, I'll just quickly talk around it. So finally, one of the options is funding opportunities. So we looked at funding opportunities, and I think the key in terms of getting active travel out there is pooling funding, is making sure that we work alongside Active Travel England, DFT, and our colleagues at the city region, so that we can pool funding together, so that we can really make a noticeable difference to the public realm and really do kind of give people the opportunity to switch from using their cars and using alternative modes. So over to you now, Charlotte. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Karen. Really love the phrase step change in the work that you've been doing in Liverpool. Fascinating to hear. So thank you so much. We'll save panel and Q&A towards the end. But without further ado, over to Alex, please.
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, great to be here today. So I thought I'd spend a few minutes talking about trial schemes. I think through COVID and since then, they've become a lot more prevalent in how active travel schemes are implemented, such as LTN, school streets, pop-up cycle lanes that Carolyn was talking about, and footway widening for businesses to sort of support their return post-COVID, excuse me, post-COVID, and also for social distancing. So if we can start with the first slide. So I think a lot of schemes, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, there was constraints on funding, and a lot of schemes went in early with little engagement. So Karen touched on that as well, that engagement is really key, and backing that engagement up, particularly with the larger schemes such as the low traffic neighbourhoods, which have got a lot of press, particularly in London, but also nationwide, is backing that up with data, backing it up with the policies behind why those schemes are being delivered. So with trial schemes in the UK, certainly in England, there's not a requirement to consult prior to schemes going in. And as I said, a lot of schemes in London went in without that engagement at the start of COVID, because there were pressures on funding and suffered with a lot of backlash and a lot of opposition, just because there was a lot of misinformation out there. So I think within the engagement and when decisions are being made by by the key decision makers on what goes in. Does it go from a trial to permanent, as Karen was touching on, you know, backing that up with the policies around why schemes are going in and the data. So now we're a number of years after COVID, and there's a lot of data out there now around the impacts of similar schemes, be that low traffic neighborhoods, school streets, those sort of things. So there's a lot of data and a lot of information out there to support the justification for a scheme and the benefits of a scheme. And I think, as I mentioned, without that, there's a lot of misinformation that comes out and gets into the community and spreads across, particularly with social media now, spreads across the community very quickly. So without a sort of a clear response to that in terms of the policy and the data, it's often you're on the back foot from the start before a scheme's even gone in. So I think we can see that in, I don't know if people have seen in social media at the moment, 50-minute cities are getting a lot of attention, and again it's that misinformation, and people are sort of attributing that to taking away people's rights, accessibility, and all that, and that misinformation, again, if it gets you on the back foot, it's very difficult to turn that around, or takes a long time to turn that around. And I guess the other thing with trials is also when you're looking at the data and looking at what you're trying to achieve, is again not to I guess how do I put it? Not to oversell it in terms of the period where you're sort of going from trialing to permanent. So in the UK, we've got an 18-month period where if you put a trial in, you've got 18 months before you have to make a decision on making it permanent or not. And that's not a lot of time to sort of see that step change in behavior. You see some, but you know, the fruits of those schemes are often 4 or 5 years in the future. So again, when you're presenting at the start of the scheme about what it's going to deliver, it's being clear about what you can achieve within the sort of assessment period to make it permanent, and also the longer term strategy, which will be, you know, part of a wider climate change, healthy sort of health policies, transport policy. You know, all of those are covered in the active travel sort of delivery. Yeah, next slide. So this was interesting. I saw this on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and I think is very similar to what Karen was saying, that the perceived impacts of a scheme, you invariably get a lot of angry people who, again, it's either misinformation or perceived impacts, that they're very opposed to a scheme. And you also get, you know, that there's a lot of people now sort of in reaction to that are very supportive of schemes. So yeah, I think it's true across our society at the moment, and with social media, that you get very polarized opinions, and you very rarely hear from the people in the middle. So in that sort of early engagement, often, you know, you can sort of have a panic. What the hell are we doing? No one seems to want this scheme. But then I think similar to what Karen found in Liverpool, this councillor sort of did a bit of research and looked at some consultations from a few areas, and what you find is that, yeah, the majority sit in the middle, that they're, you know, they can see the positives of it, and in the case of the schemes he reviewed, and I think the one Karen was talking about, you know, there's an overall positive. You get people that are extremely happy with it, people that are sort of reasonably happy with it, or, you know, it doesn't really affect them, but they can see the benefits of it. And then you get those people that when you do the consultation, that sort of negative voice that you hear, that sort of invariably are emailing councillors on a regular basis, and yeah, emailing officers, become a much smaller proportion of the overall feedback you get on a scheme. So yeah, I think, you know, inevitably with any scheme, I think that there's very few schemes that have zero negative impacts in terms of actual impacts or perceived impacts. So, you know, I think it's important to recognize that, and recognize that some people are going to be disadvantaged with any scheme, but looking at, again, going back to the policies and why you're doing it. What are the health benefits for the community? What are the travel benefits of the community? Yeah, what are the climate change, air quality impacts of the community? And therefore that sort of policy and that data driven sort of analysis to support decisions being made, you know, is backed up, because again, in the press over in the UK, we have what's called judicial reviews, where there's sort of a legal challenge to a scheme. And again, those challenges can come through the process. If the process you've undertaken is flawed, again, I mentioned, if you haven't engaged with those hard to reach elements of the community, and you're disproportionately sort of disadvantaging protected groups under the Equalities Act, that is an element that has been raised in judicial reviews. If you're not delivering on the benefits that you claim. So again, it's important to look at not overselling a scheme, understanding that change could take a number of years, and you've got a shorter period to assess and make that decision on when it's permanent. And yeah, you're never going to please everyone. So I think it's understanding that, going into it with sort of a slightly tougher skin, so that there's going to be negative reactions to it. And I say understanding why you're doing it and what it's delivering is important, because I think, if someone supports a scheme, invariably they'll tell you once. If someone doesn't like a scheme, you're probably going to hear from those people on a regular basis. So it's that proportion of, again, once you get the consultation information back and you're sort of asking people to feedback, often that is a very different sort of scale of opinion to before you ask, and when you're just getting emails into councillors and officers or sort of tweets and social media about various schemes. And then final slide for me. I was just going to touch on, again, in England we have this for a trial scheme. So that's where you put a scheme in, you monitor, assess it during a trial period before making a decision on when it goes permanent or not. And in the UK, the maximum period for that trial, for that experimental traffic order, is 18 months. And that, at the outset, that feels like quite a long time. But in reality, when you're looking at a scheme, particularly the larger schemes such as low traffic neighborhoods, you implement a scheme, then you need the scheme to settle in, people to sort of adjust their travel patterns through that. You then have a consultation period, and you might do some traffic monitoring to understand where traffic is reassigned or where flows have increased or decreased. You then sort of think, do we want to change the scheme? Do we want to adjust it, enhance it? And then obviously, particularly again with schemes that are generating a lot of sort of public interest and traction, that might have to go up quite high within the sort of council. It might go to the head of a council or a council decision to make those changes. You then implement those changes. You then reassess and reevaluate, reconsult to understand whether those changes have a positive impact, and then you're making a decision. Then in the UK, in England, you need a 6-month period where the scheme hasn't changed before you can make it permanent. So once you add in all those sort of hurdles you have to get through to make a robust decision to make a scheme permanent, and for the smaller schemes it's a lot simpler, and 18 months is absolutely fine. But I think for some of those bigger schemes, again, it's around. I've seen a lot of consultations where they talk about where an experimental order's been used. The reason is we can adapt and we can change the scheme during that trial, which is true, but then it does put a lot of pressure on those steps to get through, to get to a robust decision at the end of it. So your decision maker within the council or whoever it may be, has got all the data around the impacts, all the data around the consultation, so that decision to make a scheme permanent is backed up by the policy, by the data, and it's under sort of legal scrutiny, that decision is robust. So I think, that was just a few sort of insights and lessons learned from me personally from the sort of the trial schemes that, as I say, in the last 4 or 5 years have become much more prevalent. There wasn't something, 5 years ago, they weren't really something, particularly on the larger schemes, that was really a way of implementing, certainly in London, but I think across the UK as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. I really valued your points there on the polarized opinions and the need for robust decision making. I think that's absolutely imperative. So thank you. And then last but not least, Andrew, over to you.
Thanks, Charlotte. And likewise agree that all important discussion really on those sort of perceived impacts of the schemes and what that public opinion is really. So as Charlotte's introduced, I'm a project manager working in our county council. Our team focuses on delivering scheme design and their delivery for construction on site. Traditionally, we might have delivered sort of mostly highway schemes, and we've seen a real sort of step change over the last few years to focus on cycling and other routes. And as a majority rural county, sometimes we struggle with some of those issues of connections in place. Over COVID, we saw a significant drop in the use of highways by motor vehicles during those lockdown periods, but traffic levels have actually returned effectively to where they were pre-COVID now, which is a really interesting kind of insight into, I suppose, behaviours, and maybe there was a perceived sort of switch during that COVID period, whether there would be that long-term change, and we've unfortunately sort of seen that return to previous. So I think it really highlights the importance of what we can do to kind of encourage active travel methods and otherwise. Active travel has become a really key issue for us, both as a business as we look to reduce carbon emissions and costs, but also in giving the residents of Gloucestershire the confidence to choose alternative travel methods by selecting the types of schemes that we can deliver, and more in our gift to do so. And one of those is the Mini-Holland scheme that we're looking at in Cheltenham, and working with NRP to deliver that, the early stages of that. So following funding awarded by the DFT, we've been undertaking a feasibility study with Alex included for this Mini-Holland scheme, and it really looks to take inspiration from Dutch infrastructure to improve walking and cycling facilities, and to remove really any negative experiences people might have accessing existing infrastructure, and that includes, you know, modal filters that might stop cars cutting down side streets, or new pedestrian crossings or toucan crossings at particular intersections to switch from a priority of cars to people. I think that was a line Karen might have used earlier as well. We've just delivered the West Cheltenham Transport Improvement Scheme, which was a significant highway scheme, but also included a big portion of cycle track alongside the A40, which is the key road leading into Cheltenham, and we're actually expanding that all along the B463 to connect to a cycling route from Cheltenham to Gloucester. And often these larger infrastructure schemes sort of draw the public eye a bit more, and more of interest into them. But the Mini-Holland's scheme, the concept there is really to connect people from their homes to get to get to those key facilities, and whether that's out on their bike or walking or otherwise. Just really touching on the communications element, I think for our Mini-Holland's feasibility study, we've engaged with members of the public from the very start. So we really we've been able to focus on the key issues that that people have had in the area, and we've had some really great feedback on doing that, and that's going to be really important to take that feedback into the next stage of the project if we're successful with funding bids for the project itself. I think the future of active travel really is about sort of driving that change of habits, and keeping that level of open communication between local authorities, government, and members of the public is really quintessential in this, really, to let them know what we're doing, why we're thinking it, and sort of getting their input. I think as highlighted by Alex earlier. In general, you can't always replace a car journey from, say, Bristol to Birmingham or on a long journey like that. But you might encourage someone to cycle to a train station to then make that journey, or to walk to a coffee shop to meet with friends instead of driving. I think the Mini-Holland's really highlights on kind of giving people the confidence to do that. It's our job as a local authority to support people doing that, whether that's through the larger infrastructure schemes that you might see, or smaller changes to make those journeys more accessible and enjoyable. We won't be able to switch all journeys to active travel, But if you've got the opportunity to walk, cycle, or scoot more often, then it really improves the travelling experiences for other parties, like parents doing the school runs, people who might need to use their work vans for their living, or and of course people with disabilities. So each person who takes up an active travel method takes a car off the road, really, to reduce queuing, reducing carbon emissions, and improving that local environment. I hope that was a bit of an insight into what we're doing on the Mini-Holland scheme, but I'll pass back to Charlotte.
Thank you so much for that, Andrew. That was really, really interesting. I think your points around connectivity and giving, residents, the community, the confidence to be able to travel locally is really, really important. So thank you for that. Now over to our audiences. We've had a few questions coming in, and what I'd like to do is just quickly summarize some of the conversations, and that is particularly around engaging with hard to reach groups, and also around the turning the opposition from pop-up cycle lanes during the pandemic in Liverpool, and how they've gone about that. And Karen has responded to one of our attendees saying that it takes many different engagement methods, and undertaking on-site meetings with councillors, residents, drop-in sessions, as well as proactively engaging with corporate access forums, which is an accessibility group in Liverpool City Council, and just tackling the heads-on has been key and imperative to that. Now, I think those are really interesting points, and something that I just want to summarise for our attendees. Now, we've referenced school streets a little bit in our conversations. So, Karen, can I ask you, what role do school street schemes play in bringing about this effective active travel infrastructure and the step change that is required?
Yeah, so for us in Liverpool, school streets are really key, and one of our politicians, our cabinet lead's priorities, actually. So what most people won't realise, that actually the levelling up agenda is really apparent in terms of outside of London, because we've tried to implement school streets and had some real negativity, and not only that, we were struggling with the enforcement aspects, because many London boroughs outside London, we don't have the ability to undertake enforcement with camera enforcement. So in terms of our school streets, we've recognized that it does play a big part in ensuring that we encourage children to walk to school, cycle to school, and not only does it encourage the walking to schools, making it safe, as well as air quality, but some of the areas that we struggled is enforcing and actually closing the streets in the mornings and at the end of the school day. And actually we've been trying to work with the schools for volunteers. We train the volunteers up, and then we have the issue where volunteers won't turn up to close the streets. So we're really excited that this in January we submitted our application for TMA Part 6 so that we can undertake moving traffic interventions, so we can put CCTV cameras. So that's going to be a great big step change for Liverpool. And once we do, once it's approved and we can implement school streets and have camera enforcement, I think that Liverpool's going to really see the difference in a step change, and we'll really be able to do some of the things that we want to do within the school streets, and really benefit the children, not only from a safety point of view, so air quality. So getting our children to be safe, to feel safe in the public realm environment, and feeling confident to walk to school is key to that child growing up as an adult wanting to walk and cycle, because they've seen the benefits and they're used to the environments, and they're safe and they feel confident to maneuver in the environment. So getting to our children is key. Get to them early, as soon as possible, and school streets is a great way to get to our children, so that when children turn into 18, they don't want their first car, They're happy to walk. They see all the benefits, and they're a lot healthier than most of us. So that's the plan. So yeah, definitely key element of active travel, school streets.
Thanks for that, Karen. I think that speaks to the need for a coordinated response, and that it's a behaviour change piece as well for us all. Alex, I don't know if you wanted to give any perspectives on school streets there.
I think, yeah, I just echo that sort of similar to what you've both said, that I guess, schools are a really important part of the community, and you've got a sort of captive audience there in terms of the engagement and that behavior change piece that you just talked about, where it's not just about the physical infrastructure. You can go into the schools, you can present, you can invite the parents in, so you've got that sort of captive audience where you can really present why you're doing it, the benefits and everything. And then, as Karen said, those children soon turn into young adults, and their default isn't to try and get their first car. And then when they're starting to think about having families again, their default is not to stick them in the back of the car and drive to school, but to take them. And I think when you look at examples like Amsterdam and Holland is always sort of put as the flagship, but you go back and you look at photos of their environment in the 70s and exactly what we had 4 or 5 years ago: traffic dominant environments, lots of cars. And I think unfortunately in Amsterdam itself, I think there was a spate of child deaths on the road, and there was the community that sort of turned around and said, we can't have this happening, and asking the politicians to make the change. And here we are, sort of a generation later, or 2 generations later, and that's where you're seeing all walks of life, or all age groups, a whole diversity of community using active travel, because it does take time. It takes time to get it going, but the school streets is probably one of the best examples of being able to get that into the community and engage on the behavior change aspect, as well as the physical measures that get you the school street.
Thank you for that. We're having more questions coming in. So how can we convince people to hold out for the positive benefits of active travel and LTN schemes when they initially have been negatively impacted by the changes? Alex, I don't know if you'd like to pick that one up.
Well, I guess it comes down to that early engagement and consultation piece, and having really accessible websites or leafleting, or all the information there. So I think we were involved in some of the early Mini-Hollands back 15 years ago, I think was when they first sort of started. And when you're looking for good examples, I remember really the only research was done was over in New York, and it's difficult to convince a community in Enfield in northeast London that what happened in New York can happen in Enfield. Now that's different. Now TfL have a lot of information that they've compiled on their website. There's a lot of information out there about LTNs, so you can, when you're talking about the aspirations from the scheme, you can evidence it based on other schemes that have happened. So I think it's that data and that policy, and providing evidence to the community about what has happened in other locations, because inevitably the extreme views seem to get the most traction on social media and that sort of thing. So there was a lot in the press about how bad all these LTNs were, and but actually when you come through the consultation, as Karen said, as I saw in that tweet, that the perception and the actual is very different, and the perception is often driven by misinformation. So it's about sort of combating that from the start, and being aware that that is going to happen on any of on a lot of these schemes. But if you've got the data and the evidence, and that is accessible to the community through websites, through letter drops, through pop-ups, or sort of all the other, I guess, tools that you use to engage with the community, then that minimizes it. I don't think you'll ever get rid of it, but it minimizes it.
Thank you. Andrew, I don't know if you want to come in and offer any perspectives around the early engagement and work you've been doing in Cheltenham and Gloucestershire.
Thanks, Charlotte. I think it's gone down really well with the community, and we did reach a number of people, and we did that through a range of methods, including, well, getting Charlotte to stand at the train station for a while to see who was coming in, and just sort of offering people that chance to understand what's going on. And I think Karen raised a really important point about reaching those sort of seldom spoken to communities on issues like this, and whether that's working with local libraries to kind of get the information out, and sort of those other key points that reach communities. I think we've all seen enough sort of online surveys going around, which are really great for collecting data, but they don't always reach the people who we want to hear from. So yeah, I think it's just important to keep considering a range of methods for those communications. I think another key point really is, I know professionally a lot of us have our head in talking about LTNs and such, but quite often the conversations that influence people are from family members, or kind of through experiences, or someone you might see at the playground. And I think almost an important point is to encourage people to talk about it with their friends, and if they're seeing the benefits of it, I think it's good to for them to raise it with people they know and support it. I think that might kind of help address some of that sort of polarity of the sort of extremes, really. So
I just wanted to come in there I think one of the key things that I have identified, and I would think that people should consider, is understand your customer. So know who your customer is before you embark on a designer scheme. Understand what their needs and their requirements are, and design your scheme around them. And you'll be surprised that the end results will be a bit more pleasing. I think you'll get the results that you need to get. And also co-design is another technique. Getting the communities involved to design some schemes, which as traffic engineers we struggle with, because we think we know the answers and so on and so forth. And that's why it's thinking, it's designing things, doing things differently. And I think that the industry needs to focus on that kind of education, how we work and think about doing things differently now. So yeah, understand your customer and you'll be fine.
Thank you for that. Yeah, again, the need for a holistic approach from all subject matter experts, from policy to practice, really. We've got a few more questions that have come in, one directly for Alex. So where does a road safety audit fit into the ETO timeline that you have shared?
Well, that would be pre-scheme. So I guess the ETO timeline that I shared there was from the point of implementation. So you'd have a road safety audit similar to a permanent scheme. So once you've designed the trial scheme, you would have that audited. Once it's implemented, you'd have a stage 3 audit on the scheme, sort of following implementation, and that might highlight some elements that, again, as part of the trial scheme, you want to adjust. So from a road safety audit point of view, because it's going in, I mean, I think from memory, the road safety audit guidance is anything that is in for longer than 6 months warrants an audit. So yeah, for these trials, that they would all be audited as you would a permanent scheme.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question. And then one more, because I'm just conscious of our time. So this is an open one to all of our speakers. What role can e-vehicles play in bringing about effective active travel change and infrastructure? And could these be alienating for particular demographics or areas?
Does Andrew want to get this one, and then I can
start, certainly. Yeah, no problem. I was hot on the mic or something like that. Similarly to as Karen mentioned, we've got an e-scooter trial in Cheltenham I think understanding success. People, I think the people using them like to use them, and the people who aren't using them, I think might think a bit more negatively on them. I think they're a really great resource to kind of be able to push you a bit distances a bit further than you might be able to walk or cycle, and sort of being connected to that is a really useful resource, even if it's in its early stages. I do think we really need to recognise e-vehicles overall, and electric cars will be another sort of big solution, particularly in areas where you might not be able to deliver active travel in sort of what we might imagine as a more traditional sense. But I suppose you do need the supporting infrastructure for that, whether that's charging points. And I think in sort of recent developments, we are starting to see that shift towards having that in place. So I think it's certainly going to be part of the conversation for all of it to consider, really, particularly when we're talking about reduced emissions and the sort of some of the key benefits of active travel. Electric vehicles do a similar job.
Yeah, I just want to come in on that in terms of EV infrastructure, charging infrastructure. So we're quite proud in Liverpool because we're going to be the third largest public EV charging infrastructure soon. So we've really rolled out. So by the end of March, we will have 300 EV charging points across the city. And when we embarked on being proactive in implementing our infrastructure, you'd be surprised we have a long list of residents asking for infrastructure to be installed in their roads as well. So we're seeing, we're seeing the need. We know our residents want to get to net zero with us. They're thinking out the box, and what we are doing is that really kind of understanding our customer and where the need is, because there are influencers, there are advocates, and using our customers and our residents as our advocates will mean that, one person speaks to one person, and then before you know it, that influence grows. So I think that sometimes as local authority officers, we shouldn't always think that we're the ones that have to drive the agenda. We should pull on those groups that really want to work with us. We have an active travel forum that we've implemented, and there are advocates, and they work with us, and we sometimes run schemes by them to say, what's your view on it before we go out to general public. So we're having some people that are working with us that can give us some constructive views on a particular measure or facility. It really helps us. So, we're not alone. There are lots of people that want to implement active travel and see the role that active travel plays in getting to our net zero carbon target. So pull on those groups to assist, because you'd be surprised how much further you can go as a local authority or a company if you just pull in those particular groups.
Thank you so much. Now, I just wanted to thank everybody for attending today. We've heard some fascinating lessons and experiences from Liverpool to Gloucestershire to London. Really, really interesting hearing the difference there. So thank you to the speakers, and thank you to everybody who has attended. So lots to think about, from policy to data and evidence to the behaviour change to effective consultation and engagement and early engagement. So yes, thoughts are pondering, but thank you everybody, and yes, we look forward to seeing everyone in our next webinar series, which will be on healthcare in the spring. So thank you once again, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks.